There is something especially interesting about ancient Greece that makes it stand out from other ancient cultures. Their influence on the world today may be what makes it so special. They helped shape everything from math and science to government and the law. It could also be the Greek tales. There's something cool about a universe of gods and goddesses who are basically just mean, sometimes terrible people with superpowers. It doesn't matter what it is. Ancient Greece might seem like a good place to retire to if time travel were created and everyone could choose their own era. Not so hard back then, right? Simpler, being honest. And since we're talking about being honest, let's be that. It seems like people in ancient Greece were not as dirty and sick as people were in, say, the Middle Ages. People probably weren't just pooping in the streets, so they were cleaner. People's moods were better, and some of the world's greatest thinkers were able to just think. That's how we think ancient Greece was, though. It doesn't mean that's how it really was. Here's why you probably wouldn't even make it through the day there. Medicine was based in belief instead of science. We all know that the Greeks made a lot of progress in health, but what were those progress? They were late. Before about the 5th century BC, Greek doctors didn't think of illness as something based in science. Instead, they believed that the gods controlled the body's state. The Ancient History Encyclopedia says that the idea that illnesses were sent by the gods never really went away in Greek medicine, even after they started looking for more natural reasons and treatments. What did that mean for the person? Some went to the shrines and temples of Asclepius, like the ruins of the one shown above. An article in the Chinese Medical Journal says that they often took part in a healing rite called temple sleep, also known as incubation. It really is what it sounds like. Sleeping in a temple. People who were sick would tell a temple priest what they had dreamed about in the morning, and based on that, he would either give a cure or say they were healed. There were doctors, but there were no real requirements for someone to advertise as a doctor. The only thing they might need was the ability to say, "Poof, I'm a doctor." It might have been better for people to try the temple thing. Surgeons in ancient Greece didn't really know what they were doing. There was a scary find near Thessaloniki in 2008 that was picked up by the Associated Press. An archaeological dig found a head with a big hole in it, which suggests that someone tried to do surgery on it. They thought the person would die soon after, because there were no signs that they were getting better. In ancient Greece, surgery was only done as a last option. The Science Museum says that the Greeks did have good iron tools, but surgery was still risky. Dr. William Alexander Greenhill of Trinity College, Oxford, says that the word chirurgia refers to the technique and basically means curing by cutting and burning. Most of the time, surgery was only done on people who were hurt. Hippocrates wrote about surgery around 400 BC, but there was a problem. The Greeks didn't really know enough about anatomy to make surgeries work. Hippocrates did some basic work on anatomy, but Omar Habal of Sultan Qaboos University says that Aristotle was the first Greek who really made progress in the field. It was Aristotle's work on anatomy that led him to say that the soul was what gave life to the body. So, Greenhill says that the ancient doctors should be praised for being able to do so much with such little information. However, no patient has ever said that about their doctor, at any time. What do the people really say? Please know where and what you're cutting into. The ancient Greeks were big into bleeding. People in ancient Greece who went to the doctor, especially ones who came after Hippocrates and Galen, were likely to be given a diagnosis based on humoral theory. This wasn't just popular in Greece in the past. It was so important that people used it all the way through the 1800s. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile were thought to be the 4 humors that make up the body. Those were linked to the 4 seasons, spring, winter, summer, and fall, and the 4 elements, air, water, fire, and earth. That's when everything was right with the world. Things went wrong when they were out of balance. The Science Museum says that the treatments were all about getting things back in order. If you are told you have too much blood, for example, you would be told to let it all out. A lot of people in ancient Greece went on fasts and took laxatives. That's the main idea. It may have also been about keeping things in balance, which could be as strange as eating cold, wet veggies to get rid of black bile. The main issue was that the treatment was often very tiring. It might even make someone who is already sick too weak to fight off an infection or sickness. Sorry about that. Mysterious plagues were definitely a thing. About a quarter of the people who lived in Athens in 430 BC were likely to die in a terrible way, and scholars still don't know what happened. These are the main points from the University of Hawaii. A sickness spread through Athens while it was under attack during the Peloponnesian War. It went on for about 5 years, and a huge number of people died. The writings of the Athens general Thucydides tell us most of what we know about the plague. However, what he writes isn't easily recognizable as one disease or plague. For a while, people thought it was either smallpox or typhus. People who got sick had fevers, sore, swollen, and bloody mouths and tongues, and then they had violent diarrhea that took away many of their lives. In 2006, Scientific American wrote about a study that used DNA from the teeth of ancient Athenians who were quickly buried in a mass grave to suggest that the disease was typhoid. But not everyone is sure. According to The Atlantic, some historians said the study's testing and methods were flawed. Recently, there has been talk that it might have been a spread of Ebola. No matter what it was very bad and killed a lot of people. Pacifists definitely wouldn't have survived in ancient Greece. People have always been at war, and the ancient Greeks were no different. The Encyclopedia of Ancient History says that they were often at war with other people and city-states. In the early days of ancient Greece, advancing forces were made up of ordinary citizens who had to fight and provide their own weapons and gear. Their gear wasn't always the best, and farmers were often taken from their farms to fight. If they made it through, they were sent back to their farms at the end. It was only sometimes that they were paid, and the money was mostly just to pay their costs. Organization, symbols, or other distinguishing traits were not present to make it clear who was fighting for whom. These citizen armies were put together in different ways. As an example, look at Athens. The Metropolitan Museum of Art says that what people were expected to do relied on how much money they had and how well known they were. The horsemen were almost at the top of the social order because they were rich enough to own horses. The next class was the hoplites, who could afford the 70 pounds of armor and guns they had to carry. The lowest class was made up of the grunts, pawns, and oarsmen. The officers were the richest, and things haven't changed all that much. Life in Sparta would break most mortals. Sparta is known as the most militaristic of the Greek city-states. When they were at their strongest, around 404 BC, they were so sure of their military strength that they didn't build walls around their city. They did not need them. They had Greeks. Experts say it's hard to tell the difference between fact and fiction when it comes to Sparta because many of the facts historians have come from the people who were against them. We do know that Sparta had a lot of crops, so people didn't have to worry about food too much. This let them focus on other things, like poetry and war. Their violent and militaristic behavior began when they chose to make neighbors slaves. This gave the Spartans more time to fight. Boys between the ages of 7 and 20 were trained. They were given little food, clothes, and other supplies, and they were expected to be strong even when they were hungry or cold. They were told to steal if they needed more than what they got, and if they couldn't do it, they were killed, usually when they were babies. Nat Geographic says that they only took a break from training when they were at war. But it wasn't really a break since they had been walking crazy lengths, carrying food for 20 days, and sleeping on the ground with only a cape. Cosmetics were often deadly. If you think of ancient people who used makeup, you might first think of the Egyptians and their unique coal-based look. The BBC says that the ancient Greeks also liked to look good. They did things in a different, more simple way, and the best look was good skin that didn't show any makeup. But what they did use was often made of lead and mercury, even though they didn't use much. People used these kinds of powders all the way up to the 19th century. According to University College London, women used them so much that the effects became very clear much faster. Their skin turned black, they lost their hair, and their teeth were even damaged. People in ancient Greece Both men and women used lead face cream because they thought it would keep their skin clear and in good shape, according to NBC News. Neither of those things were true about it. You wouldn't survive the rampaging sea pirates. Eric Klein of the Capitol Archaeological Institute at George Washington University, via Haaretz, says that a very strange event took place around 1177 BC. The Babylonians, the Egyptians, and early Greek civilizations like the Minoans and Mycenaeans were among those that fell. Cities were looted and burned down, and trade routes were shut down. Hammurabi may have said it best in a letter, "Behold, the enemy's ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country." Who did this bad stuff? There's no real proof, but it's thought that the Sea Peoples, a group of raiders, killed a lot of people from many different cultures that were linked to each other. Egyptian records talk about an unknown group of people who wiped out the whole area. It looks like they came along with the Hittites at first. It's odd that no one wrote down who they were or where they came from. But the Ancient History Encyclopedia says that just means that everyone knew who they were at the time. These mystery pirates disappeared from Egyptian history in 1178 BC. They had been fighting in Egypt and the Mediterranean for hundreds of years, destroying whole cities and towns before moving on. If their boats had come to your village, would you have been able to stay alive? Most likely not. Ancient Greece ended in drought, famine, and starvation. Things that are good have to end, and society is no different. Something else was going on around the same time that the Sea Peoples were killing people and setting towns on fire. It was just as unknown for a long time as these people. After all, they had to have been motivated to kill to begin with, and scientists at the University of Paul Sabatier Toulouse have found that it was a mega drought that lasted for about 300 years. Things were bad. Harbors turned into salty lakes, crops failed, and people started dying of hunger. People had to leave their homes because they were hungry, which caused wars. After all, agriculture was important to ancient Greece, and SciNews.com says that climate change can hurt farmland. The best part is now here. It happened so slowly and over such a long time that most likely no one even knew it was happening, so no one recorded it. Kings did write about events as they happened, but what about the average person? Not really. They were slowly dying down over many generations, which is a scary fall. Justice was based on personal outrage. Most of the time, people just deal with it and move on with their lives when they make other people mad. Even if the law is broken, there is a proper way to handle it that doesn't usually involve yelling at the judge about the person you're mad at until everyone else in the room hates them too. However, that is exactly how justice looked in Athens at one point in time. The book Punishment in Ancient Athens says that people were punished because they were angry. Anyone could file charges against anyone else, and about 96% of the court records that have been found involve cases involving how much someone hated another. Laws said how angry people should be about certain things, and once the case went to court, it was the job of the prosecutor to make the jurors just as angry about something so that the person would get punished and justice would be done. That led to a kind of eye for an eye system of justice. Think about what our system would be like if it was based on the same idea. The laws of ancient Greece were incredibly brutal. It was a bad idea for Athens to ask an aristocrat named Draco to write a new set of rules in the 7th century BC. He was so mean that rules that are very strict are called draconian. Historians don't know much about him, but they do know that he was very mean. The rules were meant to get rid of the rather random ways of giving justice that were common before, according to the Ancient History Encyclopedia. People who had been hurt had the right to get revenge, and the Greeks were beginning to think that might not be a good idea. Then Draco came along. He wrote his rules to help the rich and landlords because that's what he did. Plutarch says that he made death the end of many things. Hanging out, death, taking some fruit, death, offenses against others, death, killed someone, death, and so on. Not feeling great, better get pregnant. Ancient Greeks thought they knew at least one thing for sure about the human body. Many of the illnesses women had were caused by the womb wandering off to another part of the body. It was known as the wandering womb, and some doctors even thought the womb was a different animal that lived inside a woman. That really does explain a lot of things. Wired says the Greeks thought that nice smells could be used on the you-know-where, and bad smells could be used on whatever part of the body it had gotten into. Women were often told to get pregnant to keep them fit and put the womb back in its place. Today, we know that pregnancy is risky for many health problems, such as kidney disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure. But in the past, pregnancy and delivery were even more dangerous. But Women in Antiquity says that pregnancy was recommended for everything from fever and insomnia to chronic back pain. And for those with chronic back pain, carrying around something the size of a watermelon for a few months is the best thing that can happen. Malaria made life miserable. Malaria is a dangerous disease that is spread by mosquitoes. The World Health Organization says that even mild symptoms can get worse quickly and often lead to death if they are not treated. It wasn't until the early 1900s that the mystery of how it spread was finally solved. But Scientific American says the first written accounts of the illness come from Egypt and Greece. According to interpretations written in the University of Chicago Press journals, people already back then knew that the disease was linked to wet places where mosquitoes like to live. Researchers think that the disease had a big effect on culture after it was brought in the 5th century. They think that it was one of the main reasons for sentimentalism in art, pessimism in philosophy, and decay in morality. And some say that the effects of malaria gave Rome the edge it needed to take power over Greece. Is that true, though? Who knows? You wouldn't have been there to find out if you had caught it. We hope you liked this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.